Good day everyone. We are Group 2. We are going to discuss the continuations of Chapter 4, the Section 2, the Laws of the Thing Due. So Article 1262, an obligations which consists in the delivery of the determinate thing shall be extinguished if it should be lost or destroyed without the fault of the debtor and before he has incurred in delay. When by the law or stimulations the obliger is liable even for fortuitous event. Now, the loss of the thing does not extinguish the obligations, and he should be responsible for damages. The same rule applies when the nature of obligations require the assumptions of risk. So, clearly stated na pinag-uusapan sa first paragraph ay determinate thing. Bago ma-extinguish ang obligations or obligation by loss of the due or destroyed also without the fault of the debtor or before he incurred delay, the obligations is extinguished without damage. So, wala na siyang obligation. But first, we had to define the loss of the thing due. Ang ibig sabihin, the loss of the thing due is that, according to Article 1189 of the New Civil Code, specifically Paragraph 2, it is understood that the thing is lost when it is perished, nasira, or goes off commerce or disappear in such way inexistent and unknown can be recovered. Ibig sabihin lang din ng perish is nasisira or nabubulok, or out of commerce is nawala sa sirkulasyon. So, example ng perish is fruit. You entered into agreement when you are going to deliver a 1 kilogram of mango. However, somewhere along the way, nabulok yung mangga. So, hindi mo na pwede sabihin na, oh, nandito pa yung mangga. But look, bulok na. So, it's already considered as loss. In the manner goes of commerce naman, ang usapan magdi-deliver ng phone 5110 after a year. Yung palang phone 5110 is hindi na siya functional or di na magamit. Yung ganong situations is already off commerce na kasi hindi na siya updated. Kasi ngayon is more on advanced na. So, proceed naman tayo sa questions na when loss of the thing will extinguish an obligations to give. In order that obligations may be extinguished by the loss of the thing, may mga requisite yan. So, una, the obligations is to deliver a specific or determinate thing. Pangalawa naman is the loss of the thing occurred without the fault of the debtor. So, pangatlo, the debtor is not guilty of delay. Itong tatlong to is yan yung mga first paragraph ng ating Article 1262. No? Saying na itong requisite, bago mo ma-extinguish ang isang obligations, una, ibig sabihin, pag generic, hindi. Because ang generic ay hindi nawawala, dapat specific. Like Toyota, with plate number 123ABC, that is the determinate thing. At kung mawala yan dahil sa hindi kasalanan ng debtor, or debtor is not guilty of delay, then the obligations is extinguished. So, proceed naman tayo sa tanong na, will not extinguish an obligation. So, there are cases when the loss of a specific thing, even in the absence of fault and delay, will not exempt the debtor from liability. So, kailan? So, first, when the law provides, simple. Pag sinabi ng batas na hindi na kahit nawala yan, or without fault or without delay, liable ka pa din at hindi mawawala ang obligasyon mo. So, pangalawa, when the stimulations so provide. Ito naman, kapag napag-agrihan nyo na kahit meron delay or meron kasalanan ang obligasyon, ay nandyan pa din. So, pangatlo, when the nature of the obligations requires the assumptions of risk. So, kadalasan, ito ay tinatawag nating insurance. Because the insurance, ang kanyang obligasyon is lalo na pag merong risk o may nangyari, because insurance is, assumes that risk. So, pang-apat naman is when the obligations to deliver specific things arises from crime. So, kapag ito ay nanggaling sa krimen, in the specific things na to, it will not extinguish the obligations. That is according to 1262 of the New Civil Code. So, proceed naman tayo sa Article 1263. In an obligations to deliver a generic thing, the loss or destructions of anything of the same kind does not extinguish the obligations. So pag-uusapan natin dito yung effect of loss of a generic thing. So, ito yung the debtor in case of fortuitous event. the debtor is still liable kasi yung nawala is generic lang. So, kanina is specific, ngayon generic naman. So focus lang tayo dun sa example ng fruit kanina, yung nabulok. So, ibig sabihin, kung ang pangako mo ay yung mangga at nawala or nasira, pwede ka naman bumili ulit, di ba? Because, technically speaking, hindi siya nawala because it's replaceable. It is based on the principle that generic thing never perishes. So, the debtor can be still comply to deliver a thing of the same kind. But the creditor cannot demand a superior quality, or neither can the debtor deliver a thing or inferior quality. So, that is effect of loss of generic thing. Because the Article 1262 specifically stated dapat specific or determinate thing bago magkaroon ng effect ang loss of the thing or extinguish of an obligations.
Article 1264. The court shall determine whether under the circumstances the partial loss of the object of the obligation is so important as to extinguish the obligation. Effect of partial loss of a specific thing. Ang sabi dito, there is a partial loss when only a portion of the thing is lost or destroyed, or when it suffers depreciation or deterioration. Partial loss is equivalent of difficulty of performance in obligation to do. So, yung example dito, Camille obliged herself to deliver to Mark a specific racehorse. The horse met an accident as a result of which it suffered a broken leg. The injury is permanent. So, yung broken leg is partial loss. Yun kasi hindi mo na magagamit ang isang racehorse, although nag-e-exist pa or nandiyan pa din yung racehorse. Kasi, yung purpose naman ng isang racehorse is kumarera. And paano ba kakarera kung pilay na yung paa ng isang racehorse, diba? So, hindi na mapapakinabangan pa ni Mark ang racehorse, kaya yung partial loss is important as to extinguish the obligation. So, may mga instances kasi na yung mga partial loss, although partial lang, hindi naman lahat nawawala or completely nawala. Pero yung loss is significant na pwede makonsider na total loss.
Article 1265. In Article 1265, it states that whenever the thing is lost in the possession of the debtor, it shall be presumed that the loss was due to his fault, unless there is a proof to the contrary, and without prejudice to the provisions of Article 1165, this presumption does not apply in any case of earthquake, flood, storm, or natural calamities. This is a case of presumption under the law. So in Article 1265, ang sinasabi dito is may presumption na that there was a loss due to the debtor's fault. Kung yung bagay ay nawala due to the possession of the debtor or nasa kanyang pangangalaga mismo, kapag may isang bagay na nasa pangangalaga ng debtor and bigla itong nawala, the debtor is presumed to be at fault. And presumption lang. And when we say presumption, hindi literal na at fault yung debtor talaga. It means, pwede ma-overcome ang presumption. Kung ikaw si debtor, pwede ka mag-provide like na mga proof or evidences na hindi ka at fault talaga. And it is a legal presumption. Legal presumption siya kasi binigyan lang ang debtor ng obligation para mapatunayan niya na hindi siya at fault talaga. And nasa article mismo na di applicable sa mga situation minsan ang presumption. Walang presumption na sinasabi na wala namang kasalanan si debtor kapag involved na ang calamities. Parang like yung nasa last sentence ng article 1265 mismo. Which is sinabi na this presumption does not apply in case of earthquake, flood, storm, or any other natural calamities. So, let's say, for example, si Kai nag-borrow ng motorcycle kay Joy. And upon the due date, nung dumating na yung araw na kailangan na niyang ibalik sa mismong owner yung motorcycle na hiniraman niya, which is si Joy, sinabi ni Kai kay Joy na yung motorcycle is nawala or nanakaw. And sinabi rin ni Kai na hindi na siya yung may kasalanan doon. He was not at fault. Which is, hindi naman yun enough na reason para ma-extinguish yung obligation ni Kai. And it is presumed that the loss was due to his fault, which is si Kai, yung debtor. And he is liable unless he proves the contrary. For example, is si Kai, may bahay siya, but unfortunately, is nasira yung bahay niya because of fire. And he admitted na that there was a fire and it is accidental, na yung motor mismo na hiniram niya kay creditor, which is si Joy, is nasa bahay niya mismo yung motorcycle na hiniram niya at that time na nagkaroon din ng fire na nangyari sa bahay niya. And it shows that na si Kai mismo is not liable unless yung creditor mismo, which is si Joy, is mapatunayan niya or ma-prove niya na at fault din sa part ni Kai mismo. In Article 1265, obligation is not extinguished just by saying that you are not at fault, and presumption can be executed by proving that you are not liable kung ikaw yung debtor. And in presumption is not applicable in natural calamities. However, yung creditor, pwede niya mapatunayan na yung debtor is still liable, but the debtor is not presumed at fault, meaning hindi obligado ng debtor nun na mag-provide siya ng proof or evidences na hindi naman siya yung may kasalanan kung bakit nagka-fire at nawala yung motor na hiniram niya mismo dun sa creditor.
Article 1266. The debtor in obligations to do shall also be released when the prestations becomes legally or physically impossible without the fault of the obligor. This article talks about the effect of loss or impossibility of performance in personal obligations. So, in this article mentioned that the debtor in obligation to do shall also be released when the prestation becomes legally or physically impossible. So, there are some cases na the obligation has already been there. However, it becomes legally or physically impossible or na-extinguish na siya or hindi na siya pwedeng mangyari. And kasama din sa article na to explaining that impossibility must exist after the constitution of the obligation. So, yun nga, nandun na yung obligation. However, some event or may nangyari na ang obligation is impossible nang ma-apply or na-extinguish na siya. So, na-mention din sa article 1266, the fault of legally or physically impossible without the fault of the obligor. So, ang article 1266 ay ma-apply lang if magiging impossible lang siya kung hindi kasalanan ni obligor. For example, one obliged himself to build a building for Maria. However, after a few days or after 3 days, one died due to accident. So, namatay na si Juan, meaning to say, hindi na niya pwedeng gawin yung obligation. Hindi niya siya makakapagtayo ng building for Maria kasi patay na siya. It's physically impossible. Second example, one obliged himself to build a building for Maria in a specific area. However, the government declared by law as a residential zone kung saan yung area na gustong patayuan ni Juan, dineclare na ng government na hindi na siya commercial area. Magiging na siyang residential zone. Meaning to say, nasa batas na hindi na siya pwedeng magtayo ng building doon. Ibig sabihin, hindi kasalanan ni Juan na hindi na siya makakapagtayo ng building para kay Maria.
Article 1267. When the service has become so difficult as to be manifestly beyond the contemplation of the parties, the obligor may be also released therefrom in whole or in part. Yung article po nito isang another exemption to the obligatory force of a contract Kasi po, when the performance of the service has become difficult as to be manifestly beyond the contemplation of the both parties, the obligor may also be released therefrom in whole or in part. Example po nito, yung DILG po, may pinapagawa po silang daan. Tapos nagkaroon po ng lindol. Sa sobrang lakas po ng lindol na yon, to the point na nasira or nag-deform na po yung kanilang ginagawang construction. Na yung both parties po di po nila na pag-usapan or na-predict na mangyayari po yung ganung event. Then si DILG po, pwede po siya makalaya sa obligasyon na yung by whole or part sa pagpapagawa po ng construction. Add ko lang po, Article 1267 is applicable not only to personal obligations to do but also to real obligation to give and to deliver.
1268. When the death of a thing certain and determinate proceed for a criminal offense, the debtor shall not be exempted from the payment of its price, whatever may be the cause for the loss, unless the things having been offered by him to the person who should receive it, the latter refuse without justification to accept it. Effect of loss in criminal offense. Pag yung isang bagay is proceed from a criminal offense, hindi ma-exempt si debtor for his liability whatever may be the cause for the loss, either with or without fortuitous event. Meaning, kahit may nangyari sa item, either loss or damage, still liable si debtor, unless the things having been offered by him to the person who should receive, the latter refuse without justification to accept it. So, meaning, if si creditor is in default, pag may mora accipendi, default in the part of the creditor.
The Article 1269, the obligation having been extinguished by the loss of the thing, the creditor should have all the rights of action which the debtor or may against the third person by the reason of the loss. Let's proceed to my example, but remember the rules in Article 1269 is find the frequent application in insurance. The example is one is obliged to deliver a specific bike to Pedro on his birthday, but Jose volunteered to deliver the bike by himself. The bike is lost by the fault of Jose. Question: Is Haba responsible about the bike? The answer is no, because by the Article 1268, if the specific bike is lost, the obligation is extinguished. So the creditor or the Pedro has obligation to proceed or sue Jose. And if generic the money of one or the creditor was lost by fortuitous event, example by the earthquake, even Pedro or the debtor fault, he has obligation to pay the same amount and deliver at the same date and time, because everyone say money genus never perish. And the third person or Jose is fault of lost the bike, and the example, he has not practiced the diligence of a good father of the family. Si Jose ay iniwan lang sa labas yung bike, so Jose has obligation to pay, and including the damages of the bike. Remember, if the specific things was lost, the obligation was extinguished. My personal that may related to sa Article 1269 is Article 1189, because there are three part of was loss, deterioration, and improvement.